Hi, y'all. I'm Allison. Let's talk nonfiction, specifically the Tudor era. So, this video will be spoiler free. If for some reason I do need to give away something, I will put a big old tag on the screen so you can avoid it and also mark it down in the chapters below. I don't want to ruin anyone's reading experiences. So, let's talk about Mary, Queen of Scots, and the Murder of Lord Darnley by Alison Weir. She is my go-to biographer when I want to read anything in the Tudor era or related to them, and all the way from Henry V through Mary, Elizabeth, any of Henry's wives. You get the idea. Now, I have recommended this book, I believe, a couple of times during my viewer's version of Just Spin It. And I figured before I keep pushing this book, I should probably go back and reread it and make sure it's just as compelling as I remembered it. I do love the book, but it may be quite daunting if you're not into biographies, nonfiction, or even familiar with this time period. So, and it's just because it is quite dense. And while I love Alison Weir, normally her books aren't as extensively footnoted and documented. But this one, we are trying to solve a 400-year-old cold case. It's the most notorious case in Scotland, a murder case. And there are so many levels to it. And Alison Weir was going back through the original sources and contemporary sources, propaganda that's been passed down and everything. So it's all being documented, trying to finally solve this mystery. For that reason, it is a little harder to get through than her other ones. Doesn't mean it's not worth it. It just, you got to be prepared to take it on. And when I read it the first time, I was very deep into my Tudor era, and I was very familiar with the climate of the time and a lot of the key players. So I think I had an easier time keeping up with the book, and I also read it at a much slower pace. This time, it's all on me because I finished this puppy in, I think, 2 days. 3 at the most. Let me look. I finished this book in like 3 days. I don't recommend doing that. By the time I was done, my brain was mush. It kind of gave me a hangover because there was just so much to take in. And it's such an intriguing time period. Mary is such a tragic, larger than life persona, I guess. So we start out after she leaves France, after, her first husband dies, I don't remember which number he was, and I'm not going to say wrong. Catherine de Medici is her mother-in-law, and she is now back in Scotland, Mary, and going to assume the reins of her kingdom. She's going to be an active queen, and she surrounds herself with council members, the whole 9 yards. Of course, the men aren't too thrilled to be led by a woman, and Mary has an uncanny knack of trusting the wrong people. She was easily swayed then, and she just wanted to have someone to lean on to help her with it, unlike her cousin Elizabeth, who was, I think, more apt to play this political game. Mary she didn't have the guile then. She learned later in life, but at this stage, she's in her early 20s, I believe. There is so much going on in Scotland, and to fully understand what happened with this murder and try and solve who was actually to blame, and if Mary was a part of it, if she instigated it, knew about it, or completely oblivious, you have to dig into all of that political strife and everything that's going on in Scotland at the time. So as a result of that, we've got like 30 key players in this. And as an American, I'm not as familiar with the nobility and how all of that works. So I had to get my mind back into thinking of, okay, well, Earl is something, but it's actually his name. And that can cause a little bit of confusion for, I would say, probably most Americans. But you do eventually, get to where you understand who's who. It does give you a list of key players at the beginning and explains their ranks and all of that stuff. But again, it's really hard to keep it straight at the beginning. There is an incredible propaganda campaign against Mary. She becomes a scapegoat for this murder, and Alison Weir is trying to dig through all of that material, all of the propaganda, and get down to the heart of it and discover exactly what happened and how culpable Mary was in this murder. And a civil war breaks out in Scotland. You've got the whole Catholic versus Protestant thing going on the horizon where, like I said, it's a very precarious time in the country. And then you've got over in England, Mary's trying to get Elizabeth to name her as the heir to the throne. And so you've got the conflict between England and Scotland as well. France has their finger in it, and even, I believe it was Denmark comes into play. You've got the Rome, the Pope applying pressure. There are so many layers of things going on, and it's so intriguing. And this time period, this needs to be, I don't know why they haven't made this into a movie. I know they've done quite a few lately on Elizabeth, and they did the Reign show, but I only watched that for a couple of seasons. I think that primarily focused on her time in France, when it's her time in Scotland that is really what's, I think, the most intriguing. This also covers her time when she is being held by Elizabeth over in England. So she spends like the last 20 years of her life basically in captivity. If you're not daunted by biographies and nonfiction, I do recommend this book, but go into it knowing that you're going to want to take your time with it to be able to keep everything straight. But once you do, there's forgery and smear campaigns, conspiracies, civil war brewing. Everybody's got their hands in something. So it's not the subtlety of poisoned. It's like, oh, was she wearing? It's like, no, we're talking. They weren't covert. Everything was just very, it wasn't subtle. So she's such a tragic, fascinating person from history, and she has gotten such a bad rap through the centuries, and this kind of throws a new light on her. It makes you feel a little bit more sympathetic. And I think the book does answer the question on how culpable Mary was in the death of her husband by going through the source material and really examining it. So I do recommend this book. It is just not quite the compelling, fast read that I had falsely remembered it as. It's still compelling. It's just going to take some effort and you're going to want to be focused to get into it. So what I'm going to do is, and I did a quick cursory look. I want to see if I can find a good or historical fiction based on this time period, because I think that would be a good way to become familiar with Mary's life and all of this tragedy. And then once you're a little bit more familiar with the characters, or with the people that are involved in this, all the conspirators, then I think it would be easier to digest this book. It may sound like I'm trying to warn you off of it. I'm not. I just realize that it may not necessarily have mass appeal, and it might be more of a specialized interest, for lack of better phrasing. Anyway, that's what I think. So if you do like Scottish history and the Tudors, and you're not intimidated by thoroughly researched facts and documents and all of that, then I do recommend her. Considering how I'm doing my review videos now, even though I do have one or two non-fictions that I could talk about, I'm just going to end this one here so we can have a little group just dedicated to the Tudors. So hopefully I will get back into this era soon and find something that might be a little bit more consumable for a wider audience. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you're intrigued by Mary or familiar with this, then let me know. And if you've read this book, let me know what you thought about it. I'll catch y'all next time. Bye.